Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. We're going to be talking about wildlife, especially the hunting and trapping and killing of our endangered species here in the United States with my guest, Randal Massaro. He is the National President of Union Members for the Preservation of Wildlife International. He has been a Hollywood actor and is also a retired law enforcement officer trained by the FBI to work with gangs and drug cartels, was a former representative for Greenpeace here in California, and is now currently an associate producer of a local Hollywood animal rights TV show called Animal Consciousness. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you back on Environmental Directions.
Thank you, Nancy. It's a pleasure to be back.
I have been following your work and am always amazed at what you are informing the public about, because you are particularly concerned about how the Bureau of Land Management and other governmental agencies are spending our tax dollars to subsidize and kill American wildlife. Why is that happening?
Nancy, you know as well as I do, obviously from you doing your show and being an environmentalist yourself and also involved in politics, I think it begins with just being citizens and being concerned about our environment, our climate. Look at the climate change. You see it every day in the news. Those of us that are in animal rights, we call it America's dirty little secret, America's other war, America's war on its wildlife. And it's not just America, it's all over the world now. Africans in Africa are poisoning lions as they're getting into cattle ranching now. And I mean, this is what's going on here in America. 9 species have to die in order for the cattle ranching industry and the sheep herding industry to survive. There is no middle ground with them. They want the whole pie, and it's greed. It's corporate greed. They're even edging out small family cattle ranching outfits, and big corporations are coming in. What's even worse is the fact that animal rights groups are pitted against each other, Nancy. This is what we don't like. And Union Members for the Preservation of Wildlife International, it started back in 1970 out of Europe by union organizers, union representatives that seen the killing of the Upper Yalta horses, the Lower Danube horses. Yeah, they eat horse meat in Europe. They were killing everything. They were trapping everything in Russia and Europe and other countries that don't have the same protective laws we do in the United States. It's gotten out of hand, Nancy. I think you know that as well as I do.
I certainly do, and we hope that with this interview, more people will find out about what's going on, because we have wild horses here in the United States that are being rounded up and killed when they should be able to roam free.
Yeah, under the 1971 Wild Horse and Free Roaming Act, or as people know it, the Wild Horse Annie Act. I knew actor Tom Laughlin, and I promised him before he died, if people had seen his movies, Born Losers, Billy Jack, The Trial of Billy Jack Goes to Washington, and Native American rights, but also animal rights, and I promised he and Dolores Taylor, I would continue to fight, his fight, because he had a stroke, but that's where the next generation takes over. Nancy, people like you that are involved in politics as well as animal rights, it begins with putting the right people in office. If we don't put you in office, then how are you going to represent these animals? How are you going to represent where our tax dollars are being spent? Nancy, let's look at this, for example. 120 million tax dollars a year goes to being spent rounding up wild horses and burros. Now, the Bureau of Land Management is under the Department of the Interior. You got the National Park Service, the U.S. Forestry Service. You've got Department of Agriculture, all connected to each other. It's like an octopus, and all the tentacles are out. The thing is that it's not just hunters killing wildlife with their high-powered rifles that could shoot an animal a mile or two away with these high-powered scopes. You've got tree stands. You've got the camouflage. You've got all-terrain vehicles. Every arsenal to kill an animal that the hunting industry has. But keep in mind that ecotourism brings in more money than hunting and trapping does. And American tax dollars has to subsidize the shortfalls of hunting and trapping. For example, in British Columbia, hunting brings in an estimated $3 to $5 million into British Columbia. But do you know what ecotourism brings into British Columbia?
A lot more.
30 to 75 million. The same grizzly bears that the hunters kill, like Cheeky the bear. It was a bear that had a monitor on it, like Cecil the lion. They were monitoring the Cheeky, and then some hunter decided to kill him, cut off his paws and his head, and brag about it, and that was Clayton Stoner owner of the Anaheim Mighty Ducks hockey team. So we did simultaneous protests in Canada and at the Honda Center. And look at Cecil the Lion with Dr. Palmer. And till this day, they're still going out killing wildlife. Africans don't seem to get it that once these animals are gone, the tourists aren't going to go to their country anymore.
It's so unfortunate that there are some people who believe that the animals are there to be killed, whereas, as you just pointed out, the majority of people want to see the animals in the wild naturally, and the ecotourism dollars helps the local communities. But here in the United States, almost every wolf species is endangered, and yet there's still efforts to kill the wolves. They're at the top of the predator chain. They are needed to maintain a balance among the herbivores. So how do we get people to understand the importance of leaving the wolves in the wild?
Education, first and foremost. Get involved. You can get involved in an animal rights organization.
Tell me about the wolf sanctuary that you help here in Southern California.
It's Wolf Mountain Sanctuary. These are the wolves that either would have been killed or people were raising and didn't know how to raise them, or they can't survive in the wild, so we have to keep them in their compounds. Yes, the wolves are separated according whether it's an Arctic wolf, a tundra wolf, a gray wolf, a Mexican wolf, or a coy wolf, where it's coyote and wolf. Now, keep in mind, wolves are arch enemies of coyotes, and yet now they're mating with each other because we've destroyed the populations back east and all over. So now you have once enemies are now mating with each other, which comes out with a coy wolf. It's that much more smarter and coy.
You point out that some wolves in the sanctuary were kept as pets, and of course wildlife are not pets. They're not the dogs and cats that can be domesticated and can be in our homes, and people should not hold any wildlife, whether or not it's the carnivores, whether or not it's the primates. People continue to do so. You mention also coyotes. Wolves are traditionally herd animals and hunt in a pack, yet coyotes have learned to survive individually. And even here in the city of Los Angeles, where I live, I read about and often see coyotes on our streets between Beverly Hills and Culver City, West Hollywood, and LA. Coyotes have learned somehow to commingle with human beings, but yet when people see them, they're scared of them. They want to kill them.
You're absolutely right, Nancy. Keep in mind that coyotes are probably one of the most persecuted animals on Earth, and they stretch from here to Central America, Mexico, South America. The coyotes span from Alaska on down through Canada, back east. The cattle ranchers don't love them. The sheep herders don't love them. Here's the quagmire behind that, and this is what really bothers us, too. At one time, many Native Americans, they held the buffalo sacred, the wild horse sacred, the eagle, the hawk, the coyote. All up and down the coast, many natives held the coyote to be sacred. And yet now, natives, as well as ranchers, trappers, hunters, everyone's wanting to kill a coyote. Look at some of the biggest cities in California, Arcadia, California. They first spent $15,000 to kill 20 coyotes. And what did they do? They went back and spent another $30,000 to kill some more coyotes, and they don't get it. Coyotes regulate their own population. If there's plenty of food around, they're going to have a bigger litter. If not, they'll have a smaller litter or no litter at all. Yet again, you have the alphas are the ones that are allowed to populate or procreate, not the betas. It's a hierarchy. The same with wolves. They have to wait their turn. And yet, man looks and says, we got to kill the coyotes. Well, you know what, folks? They're really our best friends because they keep us from getting rabies, typhus fever, hantavirus, and the plague. And yet we kill our best friends. We don't do that with dogs, and there's more dog attacks on people than there is coyotes. Do we kill every dog? And yet there's probably been less than 100 coyote attacks in over 125 years of keeping records. A lot of them are mistaken German shepherds that look like coyotes, and people say it was a coyote.
Wildlife is definitely our best friends. You mentioned the importance of organizations to work together. Most groups are nonprofit, volunteers. You were formerly with Greenpeace, which has really changed its focus in many different ways. They started out being anti-nuclear. They went to try and protect the whales by putting boats between them and the whale killers and the whales. Now they just came out with a report showing how plastics aren't really being recycled, and the plastics are going into the oceans and to our landfills and destroying our ecosystems. How can all these issues be interconnected? What are the issues that groups should be working together on? The climate change, the ecosystem preservation every group should care about, every wildlife, every animal and plant out there?
You just said it in a nutshell right there.
Where can people write letters now to take action?
Your congressman, assemblyman, your senator.
What are the current stories that you're presenting on your television program, Animal Consciousness?
Yes, directed by Tom Porter, Animal Consciousness. We are covering everything, the whole gamut.
I met them recently at the P22 California Wildlife event in Griffith Park, where we're trying to raise consciousness about the mountain lion. What should we know about the mountain lion?
Leave it on the endangered species list. It's barely surviving. They're getting hit by cars. They're getting poisoned, pesticides, rodenticides, and whatever these animals eat, another animal eats it, and then it goes down the chain. The mountain lion still deserves to be around, but hunters don't like the mountain lion because it eats the deer.
We've talked about some large herbivores, carnivores, both here in the United States. You've mentioned Africa, but don't we have to be concerned about some of the other animals, the sea life, the insects even?
Sure, and that's where there's so many different organizations. Look at Paul Watson and Sea Shepherd. Obviously, this did hurt us when Patrick Moore and Paul Watson split up. You got Patrick Moore going with Greenpeace, talking about green energy and the plastics. You got Paul Watson still out there going after the Norwegians or the Russian whaling ships or the Japanese whaling ships. Not one organization can handle it all, but let's unite. But everyone's fighting for that almighty donation dollar, and they knock each other. Here at Union Members, we don't knock any other organizations, Nancy. It's all about unity. If we don't stay united, we're going to lose these battles.
You are a retired law enforcement officer. Do you think that we need more law enforcement to catch the poachers and the people who are killing the wildlife illegally?
Most definitely. The manpower out there, if you see some of the programs on TV, they're far few and in between. We're outnumbered. We're outgunned. And even in Africa, that's the worst. The poaching going on out there, I feel so bad for them. And there's only so much money people can donate. I think we could do a much better job. But unfortunately, it's law enforcement and military guys that do most of the hunting, believe it or not. My fellow brethren in law enforcement and the military love hunting. And they don't realize that they're hurting America, American jobs, and the ecotourism industry by doing that.
As we always say, shoot with the camera, not with the gun.
You got it. Exactly. Hear, hear.
You've been a Hollywood actor that has been in over 8 films. Do you think the films could do a better job presenting the need to care and protect our wildlife?
I think we have quite a few documentaries out there. They could always do better, really expose the truth. So much is hidden that they don't want released. Is it Hollywood? Is it because the powers that be won't let it be shown? But they got to expose the truth of where our money is going, who's behind it, what politicians are behind it. Nobody ever says it. Look at Robert Redford along with Bruce Springsteen, his daughter, and Willie Nelson coming out with a film called Mustang. And they're showing these animal rights ladies, horse advocates, that are sterilizing the horses. Well, you're doing the BLM's job for them. The horses shouldn't be sterilized. We could provide green jobs with these horses. Put them to work by let them graze the hillsides. California goes up in flames every year. How many billions of dollars do we spend fighting forest fires, wildfires? And yet they're rounding up the horses. And yet it's all for the cattle industry and the sheep industry. The wild horses are outnumbered at least 10 to 1 by cattle and sheep. And yet every time we make news, well, the horses are starving. There's no food and water for the horses. They said that in Utah recently on the Inaki herd roundup. And they rounded up the horses because there was no food and water. But you know what they replaced the horses with, Nancy?
Cattle, which obviously eats more of the
Yes.
food and the water and aren't adapted to that environment. There are so many issues. You obviously advocate education, but yet once someone's educated, what kind of actions do you want now for people to take? Because I know I have seen you out protesting at rallies with posters when governmental agencies are trying to make decisions that are not in favor of the wildlife. What are some of the current actions that people should be aware of and can take now?
Ecotourism brings in more money than hunting and trapping does. Why should American tax dollars have to be taken away from our military vets, our police, our firefighters, our schools, our senior citizens to have to subsidize a sport industry that kills our wildlife? And you know who the biggest buyers of pelts, hides, and furs are? China and Russia. Hunting does bring in money by buying guns and bullets. I'm not fighting that. The simple fact is the hunters go after the strongest. They don't go after the weakest. And yet hunters don't like mountain lions. They want the mountain lions to be taken off the endangered species list because the mountain lion's main staple diet is deer. So who hunts deer? But the hunter. Even though hunters pay a fee, there's not enough money in it to keep the rangers out there, to do the paperwork, to send out the tags, to keep track of the poachers and the trappers and everybody.
Thank you so very much for caring talking about our wildlife and letting us know what's going on. Thank you very much for being my guest.
Thank you for having me. If anyone's interested, please call us at 760-596-9665 or go to Union Members for the Preservation of Wildlife International or look me up, Randal Massaro, on Facebook. Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you. I have been speaking with Randal Massaro, who is the National President of Union Members for the Preservation of Wildlife International and also Associate Producer of the TV show Animal Consciousness and is an actor and formerly with Greenpeace. I'm Nancy Pearlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Pearlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.